Jalase, bienvenue. Feche, welcome and good evening, everyone. To begin, I would like to thank our opening reception sponsor, Scotiabank. St. Francis Xavier University stands on the lands of Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded home of the Mi'kmaq peoples. We express our deep gratitude and appreciation to the generations of Mi'kmaq who since time immemorial have loved and stewarded these lands and the beings who call them home. Colonialization is not just history. It exists in the present tense. While we strive to decolonialize ourselves in our university, we know there is much more for us to learn. We are committed to doing the hard work of self-reflection and to repairing relationships with the Mi'kmaq on whose lands we reside, including embracing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and embodying their spirit in our day-to-day lives. I also acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. We are all treaty people. I would now like to invite the Honourable Sean Fraser, Member of Parliament for Central Nova and Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, to offer a welcome and introduction to the Honourable Frank McKenna.
Bonsoir et bienvenue. Good evening, welcome everyone. Gwe Nindawisi Sean Fraser. Well, it's really wonderful to see such an extraordinary group of people gathered here today. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to say a huge thank you to St. FX University. This is my alma mater, and when the idea came to host an economic forum grounded in good public policy that would serve the well-being of the people who call this region home, I couldn't have asked for a better partner. From top to bottom, the attitude was, how can we help pull this off? Of course, I'm pleased to join my colleague, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, who is here for at least the third time since I've been the Member of Parliament to this campus. Another person who's, of course, no stranger to this campus, having studied here many years ago, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. It's wonderful to have you here, sir. So it's widely known that he, of course, was a student at St. FX and perhaps took some of his early learnings during his time as Prime Minister. But for those of you who aren't aware, there's one other thing that we have in common at least. We've both been the Member of Parliament for Central Nova. And when he became the leader and needed a safe Conservative lead to run in, of course, the Honourable Elmer McKay did him a solid and stepped down so he could run. But it's wonderful that we both got our start here in the community. Look, my job tonight is easy. I get to introduce one of the great Atlantic Canadians of my lifetime, and that's the former Premier of New Brunswick, Ambassador to the United States, the Honourable Frank McKenna. In the spirit of remaining popular this evening, I'll endeavour to have the shortest speech during the introductions here. But Frank is an absolute champion for our region. Of course, during his time as Premier of New Brunswick, he managed to build a highway system that can allow me to drive more quickly home to Nova Scotia. But he's also been a champion for the country as a whole, not just in his role as ambassador, but continuing to offer thoughtful commentary on the policy direction that Canada ought to take, continuing to foster a culture of investment from the world community that's creating jobs in the part of the country that I call home. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Frank McKenna. Please, Frank.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. My job is to try to have the longest introduction here tonight. So we both may be able to succeed at that. We'll see. Prime Ministers and Premiers and Ministers and Chancellors and Presidents and distinguished guests, je suis ravi d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. I'm thrilled to be here. In fact, I'm honored to be here this evening as part of this event. Sir Christopher Wren was the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral, which is, of course, one of the most famous landmarks in London. There is a plaque in his honor in St. Paul that says, "If you seek my monument, look around you." And so it could be with our next speaker. The $100 million Mulroney Hall, the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government, Mulroney Scholarships, the Atlantic Economic Forum, the Mulroney Speaker Series, and he's not done yet. But what's happening here on the campus of St. Francis Xavier University is but a tiny microcosm of the impact that Brian Mulroney has had on Atlantic Canada. I was lucky enough to have a ringside seat. Although we were of different political faiths, that was dwarfed by our commonalities. We were two Irish Catholics, the two Irish Catholic boys that came from hard-scrabbled communities. In fact, we were so rural that people came out of the woods to hunt. We followed the same paths at different times in different places to Chatham, New Brunswick on the Miramichi River, an extraordinary community of itself, but a hard-luck town. We then ended up in our own time, in our own place at St. Francis Xavier University, a well-known crucible for political and community activism. Brian never, ever forgot these formative years. He never forgot where he came from. One of his earliest acts, some 40 years ago as Prime Minister, was to create the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. The public service picked out a lovely spot in downtown Ottawa where it could be headquartered. Mulroney picked out a lovely spot in downtown Moncton where it was headquartered. I'm told it was at that point the public service realized there were 3 official languages in Canada: French, English, and profanity. He continued to lavish us with the kind of attention that we had never seen before. Pulp and paper mills across the region were modernized, dramatically prolonging their life. When the base in Summerside was closed, it was replaced by the GST office, which had taken the civilian job count in Summerside from several hundred to today, where there's well over 1,160 people working in Summerside. Early on in my mandate, I received a phone call from the Prime Minister saying that the frigates were going to be built in St. John, New Brunswick. Knowing the politics that were at play, I said, "So how many are we going to get?" He said, "Well, you're getting all of them." Why are we getting them all? I said, rather skeptically, knowing the politics again. He said, "Because it's the right thing to do." What a novel concept. This $6 billion program created thousands of highly paid jobs and has now morphed into the largest procurement contract in Canadian history out of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And the list goes on. In 1985, against huge political opposition, the Prime Minister signed a $2.7 billion loan guarantee for Hibernia. Today, Hibernia is now 25 years old. The world's largest oil platform, it supports 1,200 high-paying jobs. It has produced some $15 billion in royalties from 1.2 million barrels of oil with 600,000 barrels in reserve, and a projected life expectancy until at least 2040. And the Government of Canada still owns its original position. And it has spawned an entire offshore industry that at one point had skated Newfoundland and Labrador into have status. Prime Minister Trudeau, you've had to make a big bet as well and receive fierce criticism on your investment in the Trans-Canada Mountain Pipeline. Like Mulroney, you'll be vindicated. Remember, dogs don't bark at parked cars. Hibernia was followed by the oil revenue sharing Atlantic Accords, which created great revenue streams for Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And let's not forget highways. New Brunswick had, without doubt, a reputation for having the worst and the most dangerous highways in Canada. With the Mulroney government as a generous partner, we were able to twin the entire highway from Quebec to the Nova Scotia border and have now gone from worst to first in the country. And let's not forget the cherry on the cake, which is the Confederation Bridge. At the time that it was built as the largest structure of its kind in the world, faced a whirlwind of opposition you can only imagine. Skeptical fishermen, environmentalists, engineering experts, ferry workers, and a province in Prince Edward Island that was divided exactly 50-50. It was built solely because of the heroic efforts of Stuart McGuinness and Elmer MacKay, backed by a Prime Minister who wouldn't take no for an answer. If you tried to go back to the old ferry system today in PEI, I think you'd meet with armed resistance. But at that time, it was a big fight. And finally, speaking for Acadians in the province of New Brunswick, we have a special affection for Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. At a time of considerable anxiety across the country, il était le premier ministre qui enchâssait la loi 88 dans la Constitution de Canada. He enshrined in the Constitution of Canada provisions guaranteeing the equality of French and English in the province of New Brunswick, making New Brunswick Canada's only bilingual province. In conclusion, I know there will always be a spirited debate as to who is Canada's best Prime Minister. With an agenda that includes free trade, the GST, acid rain, etc., fight against apartheid, and much more, one prominent historian refers to Mulroney as one of the most significant and important Prime Minister Canada ever had. The pantheon of contenders will be decided by the full sweep of history and undoubtedly will include our guest speaker tonight and his father. However, here in Atlantic Canada, it's no contest. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce a leader who left large footprints in the sand, the best Prime Minister that Atlantic Canada ever had, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney.
I always wish Frank could go on a little longer. You know, when I hear a warm reception like this, one thought goes through my mind. I think it's too late for a comeback. One day, we're watching television, and one of my followers as Prime Minister was really making a jerk of himself on the world stage. And I said to Mila, we were watching, it was Saturday afternoon, we were watching TV, and I said, well, this guy's so bad, I think I'm going to get myself elected leader of the party again and become Prime Minister. There was total silence. I said to Mila, did you hear me, dear? And she said, yes, I did. I said, well, what do you think? She said, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I know your new wife is really going to love the experience. So, well, it's great to be back at St. X, as Sean and Frank and so many others have said. I came here a long time ago, and believe it or not, after I had done something, you know, I should tell you, Prime Minister, we horsed around a lot when we were here. Politics, drama, the weekly newspaper, sports, not so much studies. Well, the others were like that. I was very studious. Yeah. But we didn't do very much, and believe it or not, after I had done something for St. X, I was given an honorary doctorate of laws, an honorary degree. And as I strolled across that platform, wherever it is now, to receive my honorary degree, one of my professors was overheard saying to the other, you know, I think this is the second honorary degree Mulroney has received from this place. Well, when we opened the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government in September 2019, I said the following, this sentence: this institute is open to all and their ideas. Liberals, progressive conservatives, conservatives, Greens, NDP, and others will find a home here, marked by fairness, objectivity, and scholarship of the highest order. Well, the first thing that happened after that was Sean Fraser and I. Sean, a Liberal Member of Parliament from Central Nova, me, a former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister. We met and had a coffee, and I said to Sean, you know, the idea of having this great institute at this wonderful university and just producing papers for professors to read is not what I have in mind. I'd like us to do something for Atlantic Canada. I'd like us to mobilize people and do that. And Sean stepped in. He was then a member of Parliament. He stepped in and came up with the idea that we see coming to fruition tonight. It was his idea. And he got off and did the work, got it going, and then we got hit by the pandemic, and then he was promoted to cabinet. And he had to take a back seat. So Frank McKenna and I stepped in and kept the idea going. And then Andy Haken conveyed this to this wonderful team who brought it to the end today. So this whole thing, really, if you want the genesis of it, came about because of a brilliant idea that Sean Fraser had. And Sean, I think you should stand up and take a bow. Take a bow. Now, I see my old friend here, Ken Langone, the founder of Home Depot, one of America's great investors, who's going to be one of our speakers tomorrow. And Ken is not only a brilliant businessman, but one of America's greatest philanthropists, having given, I suppose, hundreds of millions of dollars that he made to universities, and social initiatives, and so on. He's an absolutely spectacular business success. And I asked him to come to St. X so that people tomorrow, the 300 of us who will be gathering, have the advantage of his unique expertise in developing businesses and bringing them to success, and then making them international around the world, which is what Ken is specialized in. So Ken Langone, welcome, and please stand up and take a bow. Now, I have learned that over the years, that history is unconcerned with the trivia and the trash of rumors and gossip floating around Parliament Hill. History is only concerned with the big-ticket items, the big-ticket items that have shaped the future of Canada. I joined the House of Commons in 1983 as from Central Nova as a member of Parliament. The Prime Minister was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And I had known him very well in Montreal. We had a very friendly association. And we embarked on a series of major debates in the House of Commons, which were nonpartisan and highly regarded and highly respected, because we talked about national issues in Canada's future. One day, Pierre Trudeau said, "C'est en fin de soirée que l'on voit les meilleurs danseurs." The translation? It's at evening's end that one sees the best dancers. And I think that what Pierre meant was that it takes years, and not a few months or a few years, but it takes years before one can make a judgment as to how a prime minister or premier has handled his responsibilities. By way of introduction, let me mention a few of the big-ticket items that our guest speaker tonight. This is far from the trivia and the trash and the rumors of Parliament Hill. Let me deal with some of the items, that our guest speaker has had to deal with during his time in office. First, the pandemic. the greatest challenge that any prime minister has happened to deal with for Canada in 156 years. This is remarkable. And everybody says that our prime minister and our premiers conducted themselves as well as anybody else around the world in dealing with this. And this is a big ticket item. Secondly, how about the renegotiation of NAFTA with Donald Trump? Now, I did free trade with Ronald Reagan, and then I did NAFTA with George Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. And let me tell you, there's one hell of a difference between negotiating with those two gentlemen and negotiating with our friend, President Trump. Trump was out to sabotage Canada in many important ways in this, and it took a vision and a steady hand. And I saw the Prime Minister because he invited me in as an advisor to his cabinet. And I saw the big decisions he had to take at crucial moments. And I saw the end result of this incredibly challenging negotiation. The end result was a significant victory for Canada, and it is due to the leadership that we saw from the Government of Canada on this most important occasion. And what does it mean? Well, NAFTA today, just imagine if you didn't have this, if we lost this. NAFTA today is a grouping of 3 countries with 500 million people, representing 7% of the population of the world, which generates 28% of the entire wealth of the world every single year. That's what NAFTA means to Canada, the millions of jobs, the prosperity, and this was secured, in spite of Trump's opposition, this was secured by Prime Minister Trudeau and his colleagues, and that is a big ticket item. And then we have the Russia-Ukraine war. First war on European soil since Hitler in 80 years. And Canada, with a population, Ukrainian diaspora of 1.5 million people, had an obligation. My government was the first government in the Western world to recognize the independence of the Ukraine. And it was very important that Canada sustain and support that initiative. And the Government of Canada stepped up. We're a member of NATO. They fulfilled their obligations there. Bilaterally, the Government of Canada fulfilled its obligations to the Ukraine. And just last week, we saw again, not for the first time, the Prime Minister of Canada in Kiev with the President supporting all of his new initiatives, most of all, freedom from Russia tyranny. And this is what has to take place. The Ukrainians, this is not a question of, as Trump says, well, I don't care who wins. Well, I care who wins, and the Prime Minister cares who wins, and it has to be the Ukrainians. This was a big ticket item. Now, as Frank has said, and as I say, he doesn't speak long enough. But as Frank has said, the truth of the matter is, anybody who's been there knows that Atlantic Canada has not always been favorably treated by the Government of Canada. And the way you make it up is that the Prime Minister of Canada has to step in himself and say, this is what's going to happen. Not the Cabinet, I say this respectfully, not the bureaucracy, the Prime Minister. And so what's happened now? Well, there's an expression in Quebec that says, il faut absolument qu'il existe un préjugé favorable à Ottawa. There must be a favorable prejudice that exists in Ottawa with the Prime Minister so that he insists that big ticket items take place in favor of Atlantic Canada. And when you get the obstruction from the bureaucracy or other areas of Canada, hell, when I did Hibernia, which in today's terms, Frank, would be between $8 and $9 billion of cash to Newfoundland and Labrador to get Hibernia going, when I did that, the opposition was everywhere, including the Globe and Mail, our great national newspaper. I mean, at one point, my support was down to members of my immediate family. and I called my mother, and she put me on hold. And I was paying for the call. And so this préjugé favorable, the Prime Minister has it in spades when it comes to Atlantic Canada. And you only have to look at what's happened around here for the last 7 or 8 years to know that that's the case. So these are the big ticket items, some of them, that I think historians will reflect on. Not the nonsense you read about in Parliament, but the big, serious stuff that history will deal with. Bill Clinton once said, leadership, and this is all about leadership. Bill said, leadership is the capacity to look around the corner of history just a little bit. Well, this is what this weekend is all about. We are here, all of us, to look around the corner of history and see how we can advance the cause of Atlantic Canada. Not conservatives or liberals or NDPers, Atlantic Canadians, dealing with the big ticket items. It's said in the Old Testament that young men have visions and old men dream dreams. Well, great nations like Canada need a combination of both, visions and great dreams. The object of this conference is to remind us all of the magnificence of Canada and of what we can achieve together if we remember the vision and dreams of our forefathers who built this country and now can't count on us to carry it forward from generation to generation, from success to success, from one century to the next. That's what we're here for, and that, with the Prime Minister's assistance, that is what we're going to do. Thank you.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, quel énorme plaisir d'être ici avec vous ce soir à cette institution magnifique et importante. You know, though, when you first invited me to attend tonight, I knew I would have to speak after you, and I almost said no because of it. Had I known I'd have to speak after you and Frank, I would have definitely desisted because it is always an extraordinary pleasure to be able to hear you. A little more embarrassing when you're speaking about me in such glowing terms, but I very, very much appreciate it. Je suis tellement heureux d'être ici ce soir avec vous, avec Mila et avec tant de vos amis. J'ai été très honoré de pouvoir visiter le hall Brian Mulroney. The reality is he got to bring me into the replica of the Centre Block office, and the fact that I am now banished to the Mackenzie Tower in the West Block for the foreseeable future, as for the past 3 years and for the next 10 or so. The Centre Block of Parliament is going to be under renovations. It was nice to spend a few moments in my old office as well as yours. Merci pour cette introduction. C'est extrêmement généreux de votre part de m'avoir inclus ici ce soir et d'avoir dit des choses positives au niveau de tout ce qu'on est en train de livrer et de faire ensemble pour les provinces de l'Atlantique et pour tous les Canadiens. Je continue d'être ici pour vous, pour cette institution et pour tout le monde qui habite dans les provinces de l'Atlantique. Again, it's a pleasure also to be here with so many other friends. Premier Houston, thank you for welcoming us here to your province. Sean, great to have you here at your alma mater. Minister Petipa-Taylor, Minister for ACOA, as well as Minister for Official Languages. It's wonderful to be here with you as well, along with so many members of Parliament, past and present, and people committed to service in communities across the country in so many ways. It is a real pleasure to be here with you all tonight. Before I begin, however, I do want to offer my condolences to the community of Dauphin, Manitoba. 15 people died as a result of Thursday's bus crash, with many others in hospital. We're feeling for family, friends, neighbors, and all the loved ones of the victims. And I know that the people of Canada, from coast to coast to coast, are keeping them all in their thoughts as we pray for recovery for those in hospital and solace for those bitterly mourning the loss of loved ones. Dauphin is a small community, like Antigonish. Communities like this are strong and resilient. And it's the people who make them so. And when we support people and we believe in them, people can be there for their communities. That's what you did, sir. 4 decades ago, when your government created the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. It was an act of faith in the economic future of Atlantic Canada, an act that recognized the untapped potential of Atlantic Canadians. Thank you for that on behalf of all Canadians, that Atlantic Canadians have so contributed. But he was very good at seeing potential, because he saw the potential of all of Canada when he signed first the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and then negotiated and signed NAFTA. Brian, you and I are now small members of a very small club that knows what a juggernaut negotiating NAFTA actually is. Although I would say, as you pointed out, you've had that experience twice now, as you were incredibly helpful to me and to all of Team Canada as we were renegotiating the deal over the past few years. This trade deal has delivered extraordinary growth and millions of jobs, but we can never take it for granted. There will be a mandatory review of it in 2026, and with the presidential election between now and then, we're going to have to stay on top of things. So Brian, stay healthy, because we're going to need all hands on deck in 2026, just like last time, no matter who the president is. Because we can never stop making sure that we're getting the best possible deal for Canadians and for the future in everything we do. Today, we're here to look at how we can unlock economic growth for the next 4 decades and beyond. And let's be honest, as Brian pointed out, this is a very consequential moment we find ourselves in. To put it in terms people around here know well, we need to look at the future horizon with clear eyes and set our sails accordingly. The impacts of climate change are becoming more and more costly, even as people are still struggling with inflation and looking to leaders in government and in business to make sure that the benefits of economic growth are being shared fairly. Putin's brutal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine continues to impact global food and energy prices. I was in Ukraine just last week, and I addressed their national legislature where I reminded them that it was Canada's government in the early 90s, when you were in office, that was the very first to recognize Ukraine's independence, as they continue to fight now for their democracy and independence, and that we as Canadians, all governments together, will continue to stand with Ukraine with whatever it takes for as long as it takes, because it's the right thing to do. In this moment, It is critical that we all recognize that economic policy is security policy, is climate policy, is social policy. Everything is connected. We need to meet this moment and make sure that our economy is positioned to thrive in this future. Here's the great news. Atlantic Canada has all the right ingredients to succeed. Many of you will recall that it was in Stephenville, Newfoundland and Labrador that our government signed the Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance last year. This deal will see Canadian companies exporting clean, renewable hydrogen to Germany as soon as 2025, creating great middle-class jobs and strong economies everywhere in this region. Pour exporter de l'énergie propre, il faut aussi produire et transmettre de l'électricité propre ici, chez nous. En Nouvelle-Écosse, vous avez l'expertise et les ressources, et vous avez des vents qui soufflent tout le temps et des marées parmi les plus fortes de la planète. L'été dernier, j'étais ici pour annoncer un investissement dans une série d'éoliennes et dans les batteries pour stocker l'électricité propre qu'elles produisent, assez pour alimenter des centaines de milliers de foyers en électricité abordable. L'île du Prince-Édouard est presque entièrement alimentée avec de l'énergie renouvelable. C'est une province qui est un leader dans le domaine de l'énergie éolienne. L'énergie renouvelable est importante pas seulement pour préserver la qualité de l'air, mais aussi pour réduire les factures d'énergie des familles. Currently in Canada, almost 84% of our electricity is already generated from non-emitting sources. But we have to get to 100% by 2035, both for future generations and for great jobs right now. And of course, it is that last 16% that will be challenging and will require us all to work together. We need to get off coal to eliminate its harmful emissions. And I don't have to tell you why. The East Coast has been profoundly affected by the impacts of climate change. Last year, Hurricane Fiona devastated communities in all provinces, and this June's forest fires have been terrifying and costly. Just a few hours ago, I had the opportunity to see firsthand some of the impacts down in Hammond Plains, chat with first responders, community members who'd lost their homes, lost their pets, and were heartbroken and devastated. But the one thing I was hearing from those first responders, even as I was thanking them for their heroism and their incredible dedication, was concerns about next time, being prepared for the future, having the right equipment, having the right communications protocols, making sure that people are better ready to respond. Because yes, this has been some of the worst forest fires in history, but people know that extreme weather events are going to continue to happen with increasing frequency. And we all need to both step up and be prepared for them, even as we minimize the impacts they'll be having decades from now on our kids and grandkids right across the country. I know that all of you in this room, as business people, also understand the solid case for clean power. In this day and age, a clean grid is absolutely essential for drawing in major investments. As the global marketplace races towards net zero, investors are flocking to regions where the energy that is generated and transmitted doesn't pollute. We saw it with Volkswagen's historic decision to build their first ever overseas EV battery plant here in Canada in St. Thomas, Ontario. The company looked carefully right across North America, and one of the reasons they came to Canada was because in their mission to build clean cars, they're making sure their manufacturing uses clean electricity. We want to see investment like this coming to Atlantic Canada too. And that's what our commitment to building the Atlantic Loop is all about. Just think of it. The East Coast could and should be a clean energy powerhouse, and this federal government will be there to help make it happen. Because not only is it the fastest and most cost-efficient way to get off coal, it'll also make sure that the Atlantic region has power to meet growing electricity demands. In this year's budget, the federal government announced a 15% refundable tax credit for clean electricity generation, storage, and transmission projects between provinces. We're also making major clean electricity investments through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, including science-based offshore wind projects here on the East Coast, in addition to funding for the Atlantic Loop. And let's be clear, getting off coal is not just climate policy, it's economic policy. I know all of you here have looked at what's happening in the US and in Europe and understand this economic imperative. We have a plan to grow a competitive economy with great jobs here and right across the country. It uses powerful tax incentives, targeted investments, and a predictable price on pollution that returns money to families. Indeed, people here will be getting their first rebates starting in just a few weeks. By setting this economic policy framework, we're attracting investments and driving clean innovation that makes us competitive in the global race for clean solutions. It's important that we work together, including with the provinces and territories, to make sure Atlantic Canada has every competitive advantage possible. That's what I've continually talked with all 4 premiers about, so that we can give companies in the region a leg up and make sure that there are great jobs here, not just today, but for decades to come. We've got a great example of what investing in the clean economy can mean for workers right here in Nova Scotia. In March, I visited the Michelin plant over in Bridgewater. Plants like this are the lifeblood of small communities. We've all seen the hurt that follows if they close. So keeping them is about supporting these communities and the workers who are at the heart of it all. Well, for 3 generations, Canadian workers at Bridgewater have made it one of the top performing Michelin facilities in the world. Workers like Jason, who was a repairman that I met there, and Natalia, who got a job at the plant after coming to Canada from Ukraine about a decade ago. Our investment will not only reduce emissions at the plant, but also modernize operations so they can help meet the global demand for EV tires. Workers and the surrounding community rely on the factory remaining strong. Conversations I had with workers about their pride in working for that plant, but also the uncertainty of coming years. I got an earful of them about why EV tires are different than regular tires. It's a big deal. First of all, the torque is likely to strip off the outside of tires if they're not properly built. The noise is a thing too. I geeked out on this one. Because the engine's so silent, you hear the noise of the tires much more, and they have to make quieter tires for it. It's also a lot more weight on an electric vehicle than on regular cars because of the batteries. So there's a whole level of technologies going in there, but it's important for Michelin as well that it can continue to invest in a clean grid as it moves forward to draw and be competitive on the marketplace. Well, because of our investments, Jason and his co-workers and the 9,000 person strong community of Bridgewater can count on good, stable jobs for the next generation. Natalia actually came to Ottawa in March and was in the House of Commons when President Biden visited, which is just another way that your communities and your voices resonate in Ottawa. One of the things we always need to remember is that economic growth isn't just about a big number on a bottom line. It's about creating opportunities for people and giving them a future to believe in, to invest in, so they, in turn, continue to invest in and build their communities. Prenons l'exemple de l'engagement de notre gouvernement en matière de services abordables, d'apprentissage et de garde de jeunes enfants. On a lancé ce programme il y a 2 ans et une province de la région, Bravo, Terre-Neuve et Labrador, a déjà atteint la cible de 10 $ par jour. Et je sais que les autres ont déjà réussi à réduire les frais de moitié. Grâce à cette initiative, non seulement les familles économisent beaucoup d'argent, mais la participation des femmes au marché du travail a atteint un sommet sans précédent au Canada. Autrement dit, il y a plus de travailleurs, plus d'argent pour les familles et plus d'opportunités pour tout le monde. On fait aussi des investissements majeurs dans les soins de santé publique, notamment dans les soins de première ligne. Peu importe où vous habitez ou quel salaire vous gagnez, tous les Canadiens méritent de recevoir des soins de santé de qualité. Et on met en place un programme pour des soins dentaires au plan national. La prestation dentaire canadienne a déjà aidé plus de 300 000 enfants à améliorer leur santé dentaire. Et ces programmes, comme les soins de santé, les soins dentaires et les services de garde d'enfants, créent la stabilité sociale qui favorise la croissance de nos économies. And let's be very clear, those 3 initiatives that we put forward, $10 a day child care, close to $200 billion of investment to deliver metrics and real results through healthcare investments, and dental care program that has already meant that 300,000 kids across this country have accessed dental care when they didn't before, are not just social programs. They are economic programs that keep us competitive. I talk a lot with international investors, and they tell me regularly that in Canada, our greatest competitive advantage is not our critical minerals, not our 2 official languages, not our access to the coasts, not our tremendous natural resources, although those are all great. Canada's greatest competitive advantage is Canadians themselves. We are one of the best educated countries in the planet. We have a strong social safety net. We have healthy, forward-thinking, ambitious Canadians, strong in their communities, optimistic about the future, and that is something that companies around the world want to be part of in this time of tremendous uncertainty. Our strong middle class is the reason that companies from around the world want to come and build and grow here. And this is a self-reinforcing policy, because not only does it attract investments that further strengthen the middle class, it also helps Canada attract global talent and immigrants from around the world that, again, gives those same investors confidence in our potential. Canada is now the fastest growing country in the G7, number 1 in terms of population growth, and number 2 only to the US in terms of economic growth. And already we've had higher than expected GDP growth in the first quarter. Strong population growth is helping fuel economic growth, and Atlantic Canada is proof of that. Halifax, Charlottetown, and Moncton led the country in population growth in 2022. And since 2015, Atlantic Canada's overall population has grown by over 160,000 people, 15,000 of whom are immigrants. The programs and services Canada is providing is also helping newcomers thrive here and contribute to the Atlantic Canadian economy. We've seen incredible renewal in this region over the decades since ACOA was created. This is the legacy of Prime Minister Mulroney and Dr. Donald Savoy, and we can all be grateful for what their vision accomplished. Brian, as we were standing earlier in that replica office, I delivered to you the original report that established ACOA, dusted off and fetched from the archives of Canada to have a permanent home here at Mulroney Hall, where it deserves to be. But on the first page of that report, in the cover letter that Dr. Savoy wrote, he declared that you had put together the most comprehensive plan to promote economic development in Atlantic Canada that we had ever seen. And I'll tell you, 40 years later, that still holds true. Thank you, Brian, for everything you did then and now for Atlantic Canada. Great, now Jeanette's going to ask me for more money for ACOA, but that's okay. It's money well spent. In 2016, our government launched the Atlantic Growth Strategy to further revitalize the region. And today we see the successes of those initiatives as the East Coast has become a place with great colleges and universities like St. FX that are doing leading research, a place teeming with startups and entrepreneurs, a place that is attracting talent from all over the world, a place that is more diverse and full of opportunity than ever. One of the great Canadian stories of the past 8 years comes from right here in Antigonish. The story of a Syrian refugee, yes, and a lot of you know exactly where I'm going with this, who came to Canada after his family's chocolate factory was bombed. Tarek Haddad arrived in 2016 and with his expertise founded a new chocolate company called Peace by Chocolate. They got support from ACOA and have now created many, many jobs right here in this town. This is not just the story of Tarek or of Antigonish. This is the story of Canada, a country that is welcoming, a country that invests in people, a country that not only sees the future, but seizes it, a country where everyone has a real and fair chance at success, a country that is rooted in community. Throughout our history, Canadian political leadership has never lost sight of that. And today, that's more important than ever. On a des défis énormes devant nous. Le climat, la guerre, les chaînes d'approvisionnement, l'inflation mondiale. On doit adopter une approche réaliste pour relever ces défis et on doit mettre les gens au centre de nos actions. We need to meet the challenges of today with strength and optimism. We need to be fiscally responsible, yes, but at the same time we need to be unrelentingly ambitious to seize every opportunity we can for our workers and our economy. You know, Brian, there seem to be two kinds of politicians today. Those who want to burn things down and those more like you were, constantly want to build things up. Well, our government is and always will be focused on how we can invest in people and in the future of their communities. And that's what we'll continue to do every day to help the Atlantic Canadian economy keep growing, ensure that every region of the country prospers, and help build an economy that works for all Canadians. Merci beaucoup, mes chers amis.
Well, Prime Minister, thank you very much for a very important speech that helps set the agenda for all of us beginning tomorrow, trying to build a new economy in Atlantic Canada. So thank you very, very much for that, but also for taking the time to come. This is very important when the Prime Minister signals to the country his interest in a project by attending and speaking there, and so we're very appreciative of that. Prime Minister, we thank you very much. Now we have a small gift for you, sir. Our president, our great president, Andy Haken, St. FX, will come up here and make the presentation in a second. But I just wanted to... I'm just getting started, Andy. I mean, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Frank to come back.
For round two.
Prime Minister, I know how much you enjoy Harrington Lake, and believe me, Neil and I enjoyed it a great deal too. And it's bucolic, and it's wonderful, and it's up there in the mountains. And we have in Miragamish and Antigonish a brilliant young artist, Mary Meredith, who I think is going to go to the very top of the art world in Canada. She just has a special talent. And she did this at the university's request for you, sir. And so you and Sophie, I hope, will enjoy it. And I can see a space in Harrington Lake where it'd be perfect. You just put Neil and I'll go there and tell you which wall to pull it on.
You're welcome
Yeah.
anytime.
Yeah, so Andy and the Prime Minister, will you please step up here? Isn't that wonderful? Beautiful. Beautiful. Remember the name, Mary Meredith. That's going to cost you a lot of money in the future. Her prices are going up.